Hi, welcome to this episode of the Comics Multiverse. I'm Chad, and this is Kevin, and we're here to talk about Magnificent with the book's creator. And I will let her say her name because I had the pronunciation up, and my computer lost the page. So let me bring her in. She can introduce herself, and we'll get chatting about the book.
Hi, Chad.
Hi, Bethany. How's it going?
Going well. It's Murguia.
Okay.
It's a tricky one. If you think of maybe Carmen Gia, for those of us of a certain age, the old Volkswagen might help. But otherwise, I'm never really sure how to give people a hint for it. But Murguia.
Well, all right. Well, nice to meet you. Welcome to the show. And like I said, we're here to talk about your graphic novel, Magnificent, which as soon as the copy came in the mail, I sat outside, I read it, and I really enjoyed it. So,
Thank you so much.
and as a dog person myself, then, it spoke to me on, kind of a couple of levels. So, but before we get talking about the book, why don't you tell me about yourself, um, career, how you were introduced to comics, or you know, things. Sorry.
Sure. Sure. I'll give you a little bit of background. Let's see. I've been making picture books, writing and illustrating picture books for 10 or 14 years now. My very first job was working in a cookie factory, the graveyard shift of a cookie factory. And I think you're in upstate New York. Is that right? Is that where you are?
Yes.
Do you know Archway Cookies from long ago? Some people know.
No, because I moved here 18 years ago from West Virginia myself. So.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, Archway Cookies are a thing. They have a certain amount of cult following. And I worked in that factory for the graveyard shift. That was my very first job. And between that and the picture books, I went to some universities. I thought I might be an engineer. I thought I might be an architect. But I always really was drawn to illustration and just didn't see a clear career path there. I was, sort of pushed in directions of careers that had obvious paths. And I think that's one of those things that can happen when you grow up in a rural area without a lot of creative folks around to sort of give you a sense of what a creative life or unusual career path might be. So anyway, I tried architecture, some engineering, and then psychology as degrees, and finally landed on illustration, which I absolutely adored. And then ended up working as an art director at magazines for a number of years, and then as an art director at catalogs for a number of years, and then finally found my way back to illustration and making picture books. So that's kind of in a nutshell what I've been doing for many years. And the big confession is that I wasn't really a comics kid.
Hey, that's fine.
I always feel like a little bit of an imposter and have to get that out there. I did read comics. I read Calvin and Hobbes. I read Snoopy. I loved Gary Larson, but I wasn't a comic book kid. So it wasn't really in my head as something that I would ever do. And then I think maybe 8 years or so ago, I found middle grade graphic novels. I have a young daughter who fell in love with them. And so I got to see them through her eyes and start reading them and really just get a sense of their power. So for me, it was Phoebe and Her Unicorn. That was my gateway graphic novel, and Be Prepared by Vera Broskal. I read those, the whole series of Phoebe and Her Unicorn and Be Prepared, and really just felt the power of graphic novels and what they could do, and was sort of itching to do something longer than a picture book, to do something with more character. And that's how I started heading down this path toward Wagnificent.
So let's kind of talk about that more. Tell us a bit about the book. And
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So in a nutshell, Wagnificent is the story of Thunder the dog, Thunder's human, Sage, and Thunder's inner wolf, who I call a bit of a curmudgeon, who just really wants Thunder to follow her wild instincts. And I think at its heart, it's a relationship story. It's a story about care and love, and all of the amazing things that can happen when humans have a bond with an animal, but told with some goofiness and some humor, because our animals all contain multitudes, and I think that's sort of the joy of it, is realizing the full spectrum of what they are. I have a dog now that this story is based on. And for whatever reason, I've had dogs before. I grew up with dogs, but she's the one that just found her way into my heart in a huge way. Maybe because we hiked miles and miles together, or, she harmonizes with me when I sing. She stares in my eyes in this very deep way, like dogs do. And, like every other dog person out there, I just had that sense that I have the best dog in the world, and really wanted to try to find a way to tell a story from the dog's perspective. So that's where it started. And
Kevin just gave me an ugly look. Just joking.
Book. Yeah. So I'd been thinking about it as an idea, like, how do you write a story about a dog that's interesting? I knew it was going to be a human relationship, but I didn't know I couldn't find my way in. And then I happened to be at a petting zoo where they had a domestication timeline on the wall, and the domestication timeline showed that dogs were the first domesticated animals, which, I think it's something that we all kind of know in the back of our minds, but I had never paid too much attention to it. When something's ubiquitous, like a dog, they're just there. They're dogs. You know what they are. But I started doing research and just went into a massive rabbit hole of research about dogs and wolves, and how fascinating it is how they still share 99.9% of their DNA, all these things about dogs that come straight from wolves, and then the ways that they've changed. And a story just kind of started to form around all of that for me, and in building the book. Yeah.
So is Sage based on kind of you? I think you said you had a daughter. Is it kind of a mixture of the two of you?
I have two daughters, and it's probably a mixture of all three of us to a degree. I think we probably all share that characteristic of having been a 9-year-old kid who was very given to flights of fancy and following their whims and being very much in their own head, and which I think is amazing, and imagination is incredible. And then also I think there's a little bit of a message in terms of paying attention to what's right in front of you, right? Which can be so easy to not to really, to take the time to really connect. So, yeah.
And I like that, kind of in the chapter breaks, you had the pack manners illustrations for things. I thought that was really cute.
Thank you. So the book is broken up. It is obviously a fictional story, but there are those little moments between the chapters that are kind of just universal dog behaviors, or kind of dog observations that I think everybody can relate to, and somewhat related to their wolfy backgrounds. For example, I think the first one shows posture, and all that posture we see from our dogs, and the way they communicate with their bodies and their ears and their faces comes directly from wolves. And then, just all sorts of things in there. One of my favorite things is what frightens my dogs versus what doesn't frighten my dogs. So, terrified of a plastic bag, fine with approaching a coyote. So there's just this sense of trying to understand what goes on in their heads, and to really get into what they're thinking, and what they're thinking, right? Like, wouldn't it be great to know?
I talking about Kevin. He's we adopted him. He's an American shelter dog, but he's mostly herding dogs. So he lets us know when he wants to go outside, or I just sat outside and he's walking towards the door. So
that is one of my favorite things, when there's just a word buried in a sentence and the ears go up and they perk up, and you're like, wow, you're listening to every single thing I say. Even though it can seem like they're not, they really are listening to every bit of it, spying on us.
Or I think I've, somehow trained him that every time I open the refrigerator to get like iced coffee, then I'm always going to put, whipped cream on it. And he and the cat always run to and expect their offering. So
yes, yeah. I know those rituals, like those daily rituals with the animals, they're just incredible. Like it's kind of my favorite thing. Those moments where you're exactly on the same page and you're like, oh, we do speak the same language. Food, at least we speak that one. The same language there. Yeah.
So, how long did it kind of take you to put the book together from writing to, the artwork to the coloring?
Long time. It was a long process. So it is my first graphic novel, and just the process of understanding what that meant took some time, a number of stabs at really understanding comic language. So even though I'd done picture books and I'd been a graphic designer, so I've been putting words and pictures together for a very long time. It was a totally new language to learn, and that took me some time. So there was back and forth in trying to write, trying to understand what a script would look like on the page, not having had that experience. So I think the initial writing and figuring out the story probably took me on and off a year or two or three. It's all kind of hazy now. More than a year. And then there was some, back and forth with my editor. And then once it really got moving, I think the sketches took about 4 months, and the inks took about 4 months, and the color took about 4 months. So it was about a year once all of the art, once we had an approved script to get all of the artwork done.
Was it sounds like it was a kind of learning experience working with telling the story in panels, because it works. I mean, there's throughout the book, there's different layouts. I mean, some are full page, some are half page, some have 9 panels. But how is making that translating the scripts into that kind of storytelling format for you?
That was what part of the big part of the learning curve, I think. One of the pieces that I had a sense of from having done picture books was pacing in terms of page turns, which is nice. So if you've just maybe done 4-panel comics or something and come to doing graphic novels, that's going to be a learning curve for you. So I had a sense of wanting to make sure that pages turned to a surprise or turned to, just to make sure that the pacing from page to page was going the way that it should. But then trying to figure out how much text fits in a panel, what's too much, what's the right flow of text, balloons or bubbles down through a page. You really have to think about all of those pieces and how they fit. So, I joined an online graphic novel community, met a bunch of people making graphic novels, and did some graphic novel intensives with teachers. And just through that process and a lot of listening and a lot of looking at examples and a lot of critiquing, started to get a sense of what I needed to be paying attention to, what I didn't know, right? Like it's always figuring out what you don't know. Yeah.
Now, do you have a kind of a favorite part of the book that kind of speaks a lot to either you as a dog owner, or as an animal lover, period?
That's a good question. Well, I do the non-graphic novel part in the back, which is all nonfiction. Everything I included there is information that's just sort of fascinating to me about the history of domestication and the ways in which our dogs still act like wolves. All of that I love. But from a story perspective, I think, let me see if I can find it quickly. I think one of my favorite spreads is the moment when Thunder starts stalking the bird in the yard, and you see that there's sort of a wolf shadow there. That speaks to me because I think of dogs as, existing on this kind of spectrum from human to wild. Like there are moments when dogs are so human, they're sitting next to you, looking at you, and you're like, that's a human being, and they totally understand me. And then there are moments where their behavior is so wild and you don't understand it. And I think, our dog that we have here, one of her favorite pastimes was to spend time watching our hamster. We had a hamster for a long time. And she'd just bound through the house very happily. And if she got near the room where the hamster was, she would drop down and start doing kind of an army crawl and then stand in front of the hamster cage for hours, sometimes drooling. And and I was like, what is going to happen to this hamster? It was an ongoing family bet about what would happen if the hamster ever got out of the cage, and just how wild the dog was. But I think it's kind of why we love them too, because they bring some of that wildness into our lives. So that image kind of encapsulates that little dog, wild, all of it in one piece for me.
Well, when I first received the book and I opened it, I was sitting outside in the backyard reading it, and there's a squirrel that likes to tease Kevin, so I kind of picked up on that when after going through that section of the book.
That's great. They do, don't they? I mean, it does seem like teasing. I think it's got to be a pastime, like squirrel pastime, to just mess with dogs. I can't think of any other explanation for the way they just kind of make the funny noises at them and tease them. That's exactly what they do. Yeah.
Now, you said you currently have 3 dogs. Is there any dogs that you've had before that you also kind of molded it, kind of put into the personality of the dog in the book?
Well, this story started when we had 1 dog, so that was 8 years ago, and since then we've added 2 more on, and just got one very recently. So we have a puppy in the house. So I'm in the middle of watching.
I remember those days.
Yeah, it's very funny. And the pack dynamics are funny, and watching how the older dogs teach the younger one. They really are teaching him the rules. And, you'll see them yelling at him sometimes saying, that's not how we do things in this house. Don't do that. Don't be such a puppy. And it's kind of amazing to watch. So as we've added dogs, their pieces of their personalities have come into the story. Mm-hmm. And we had 1 dog before she had some incredible characteristics that I think will show up in subsequent stories in this series. We'll see.
Oh, so it's a series.
It is. We're working on, we have 2 more books that we're working on in the series.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what would you like for people who read this book? What would you like for them to take away from, if anything?
That's a good question. I think for me, again, I mentioned before that it's a relationship story, and I think understanding that relationships can be tricky, or friendships, and we all come to them with our own expectations. And I think it gets even trickier when it's 2 different species. But the moments in the book where where Thunder's and Sage's expectations aren't matching up are where all the chaos and some of the silliness and fun and also the hard pieces happen. But when their expectations do overlap, it's really magical. Like, there's something amazing that happens when when you totally understand each other. I mean, I'm even feeling it right now in just teaching a dog to sit, right? And the dog sits and you're like, whoa, like how, that's so magical. So what I would hope for people to take away from it is that, you have to actually pay attention to animals and not necessarily come to a relationship with animals with expectations, right? Like, you can't just expect that they're going to behave, or that they're sort of like cute little stuffed animals, or whatever, preconceived notions we might have, to really see who they are as individuals and build your relationships with them from there, I think is what I would want people to take away from it.
Yeah, because I know that when I growing up, we had a Samoyed Husky mix, and being from West Virginia, my mother did not like animals, so the dog stayed outside. And so when I moved up here to New York, and one of the things that I wanted to when I had my own place was to get a dog. And my older brother and sister-in-law, they rescue greyhounds, and kind of they kind of tend to take the ones that are older, or they've had at one point they had 3 dogs and 9 legs.
That's great. The tripod, TAWED.
Yeah, the tripod, yeah. And then, but when I met my wife, she had a black lab, and so I passed that test. And then,
very good.
when kind of like you were saying, wanting a new dog to learn from the older dog, we she, she got a puppy lab and kind of, you know, and then we had um, after Sherman, who was the older dog, passed, we decided we were ready for another dog, and we adopted. Sorry, I'm gonna this chokes me up. His
Oh,
his name was his name was Odin because he only had one eye, and we when we had, we only had him for 2.5 years before he like passed away suddenly. So
oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
yeah, so but again, he's right here on my arm. So
Amazing. Totally amazing. Yes. Ah,
and
Odin.
yeah, so but dogs are wonderful creatures, and I don't know why anybody would not like them.
Absolutely.
So
I agree with that.
are you able to give us kind of a overview of what the next couple books are about, or if you can't, then that's fine. But
Sure. Yeah.
I'm being nosy.
Yeah, that's great. The second book has a foster dog through line. So it's about another dog coming into the house and Thunder figuring out how to deal with that. So, the first book is kind of a dog figuring out how to live in a human world, right? They live in our world.
Mhm.
They have to figure out our rules and come in and learn our rules. And then the second book is about a dog figuring out how to deal with other dogs in a human world, because it's not how they would do it on their own. They have their own they have their own language. They have their own language with humans. So it's really about that whole relationship and how, sort of what we're witnessing here, or you witnessed with your labs or with any of your dogs, what it means to bring another animal into the mix and how all the communication works around that. And then the third book is more of a um, training and some scent work, like actual nose work that dogs do, kind of woven into a little bit of and some anxiety woven into the whole thing too. So those are some of the themes in the third book that all kind of go together and work together. Yeah.
And do you feel that you have, and as you develop those and get into those, do you think what do you think is the most important thing you'll take from this book into getting those ready?
In terms of how to actually create a graphic novel.
Yeah,
Or
yeah, yeah.
thankfully, a lot of the heavy lifting has been done in some ways, just because we have the characters designed. We have, for the most part, a palette. I mean, we'll add and change some colors here and there. We have, the title type. So all of those big pieces that had to be determined will continue on, for the other two books. But honestly, the biggest thing is just super organization and lots of spreadsheets and daily quotas. It's the only way to do it. I have to know every step, every single day. How many pages do I have to get done today, and
Mhm.
cross them off on a sheet? There was a point with the first book where I made myself a big spreadsheet and put it on the wall. And I was like, I'm going to put a sticker on each one of these, every page that I get done. And then at some point, just putting a sticker on was too much work because I was so busy trying to get the pages done. So now I've shifted over to just check mark, check mark, check mark. Yeah.
So I know you said you mentioned a lot of the cartoonists that you have kind of grew up with. Or which, if any, kind of influence your art style, or do you kind of how how did you develop your art style that you use in the books?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think my art style that I'm using in these books is a digital translation of the more of the picture book style that I've used in the past. So I always often worked in pen and ink. I really love working with a nib. I worked in a calligraphy studio for a long time. So I was trying to come up with a digital representation of that sort of line to a degree, have some nice thicks and thins. And then I also do watercolor, and I knew that I was not going to be able to do watercolor for this, but I wanted to have some sort of watercolor transparency feel, because I just like the movement that it gives a book. And, there's a little bit of softness there. It was important to me that the character, the dog especially, be realistic enough, not stylized too much, that kids would and adults would recognize the postures, would recognize some of the communication, that because so much of the communication is nonverbal. So when the tail is tucked or any of those moments, that they'd be very clear. So I guess it was mostly what works for this book a little bit more than trying to emulate another style, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. No, that does. Was there anything else about the book itself, or anything that you wanted to let people know about that maybe I didn't ask about?
Oh, boy. I think that's mostly it. I think you've asked really great questions. No, I just, it's coming out in July, so I guess I could say that. It's not out there yet. And I guess I could say that for anybody who pre-orders, I have some really cool stickers to give away and things along those lines, and you can find out about that on my website.
Okay. And are you on social media or anything like that?
I'm on Instagram semi frequently. I go on and off. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat this evening about the book Magnificent: The Adventures of Thunder and Sage. I mean, I really enjoyed it, and I showed it to my son, and he's excited to kind of look at it, I think.
Oh, fantastic. How old's your son?
He is 7.
Oh, yeah. He's right in the age range.
Yeah,
so
right. Yeah.
Let me know what he thinks.
That was one of the things that kind of, when I got the thing from your PR person, that kind of, sparked my interest about the book, was that it was first off, it was about dogs. So you had me sold there. But and then the fact that it was a graphic novel, and within that age, that because he's just starting to read on a regular, where he can read, and just something that he could pick up and look at himself.
Does he have a favorite series at this point? Is he getting deep into graphic novels yet, or
Captain
not?
Underpants?
Of course. Great. It's a perfect place to start. Well, thank you, and thank Kevin for being here as well. For however long Kevin was here.
Yeah, he found the cat food plate in the room, licked it a little bit, and moved on.
Perfect. Excellent.
All right, well, take care. We'll be in touch, and hope to talk with you again when the next book comes out, if you're up for it.
That'd be great. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
All right. You
Bye.
too. Bye.